So let's move to another big topic, which is that there is this World War II revisionism that's happening now on the right in the conservative commentariat of America. And I mentioned right at the beginning the likes of Darryl Cooper, Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson. And it seems to me, looking into it, and I should say Nick Fuentes to a certain degree, when I look into them, they seem to be three philosophical godfathers to their line of thought. One is David Irving. Darryl Cooper himself has made many, many references to David Irving. A lot of his ideas are straight from Irving. Another is John Mearsheimer, who Fuentes has referenced, has been on Tucker Carlson many times. Dave Smith regularly references him. It's the authority that Dave Smith refers to, even though Dave Smith doesn't believe to appealing to authority. But he very much did that on the Coleman Hughes interview. But the third big one is Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan published a book in 2008 called Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War, How Britain Lost Its Empire and the West Lost the World. And the general thesis is that World War II was an unnecessary war, and because of Britain's guarantee to Poland, it grew into a huge world war, cost 50 million lives, and handed half of Europe to Stalin, and brought America and Britain in unnecessarily, and Britain lost its empire as well. So it seems to me that he is, as I say, one of the philosophical godfathers. And you, am I right in understanding, knew him, and I've considered him a friend?
I knew him. I liked him. He, with Buchanan, he went through a bit of a metamorphosis. The younger Buchanan, the Buchanan I knew, I mean, I was a lot younger than he was. So I was in my 20s. He was probably in his 40s at the time.
And you knew him in the Reagan administration?
In the Reagan administration. He was I don't remember now what exactly he did. But in any event, I knew him both as a government figure, but I also knew him as a columnist. I mean, in other words, I socialized with him occasionally. We were part of a younger group of conservatives, young Reaganites in Washington, D.C. And so we, because there weren't that many of us, we were very much part of that crowd. And Buchanan was one of us in the sense that he was by and large a straight up Reaganite. He had come out of the Nixon years, and it was a measure of how much things had changed. At one point, Buchanan, in his autobiography, I believe, Nixon says to him, he says, "Pat, tell me, who are the conservatives?" So think about it. You have the Republican president of the United States in the 1970s, and he doesn't even know what a conservative is. He has to ask Pat Buchanan, "Tell me who these people are," right? By Reagan, this had all changed. We all knew who the conservatives were, and Peggy Noonan was part of that group, and the chief speechwriter for Reagan was a guy named Anthony Dolan. My not classmate, but my colleague from Dartmouth, Peter Robinson, was writing speeches for Reagan. So we were all in this together. I think what happened with Buchanan is that as he began to think about this topic of the decline of the West, by the way, a topic all of us were thinking about in one way or another. I was interested in those days, and I still am, in the philosopher Leo Strauss. And Strauss's big topic is, in fact, the decline of the West and what can be done about it, or how should we think about it, and what are the roots of it, and are the roots of it in modernity itself. And of course, with Strauss, you have this idea that there was a philosophical clash between the ancients and the moderns. I mean, Strauss went all the way back to the ancient Greeks to think about all this. I think with Buchanan, because he was a policy guy, he looked at it and he basically goes, the power of the West was crippled by World War II. And now, interestingly, I think that a stronger case could be made for the Buchananite position if you went a little further back and focused on World War I. And I say that because I'm very much influenced by a book written by a literary critic, Paul Fussell, about World War I, in which he talks about the fact that you could call it old verities, old ideas, like valor and courage and manliness and patriarchy were not considered to be ironic prior to World War I. People would use these words positively. This man did an act of valor. After World War I, you had to look sideways at that. And the valor had a question mark or quotation marks around it, and you had to make a joke about it, and you had to be sarcastic, and you had to imply that he gave his life for nothing, and patriotism itself is now called into question. Before World War I, people would, again, without being self-conscious, call a horse a steed. He mounted his steed. You couldn't say that with a straight face today, but neither could you say it with a straight face in the 1920s. So the point that Fussell is making is that the massive destructiveness of World War I and the sheer apparent unnecessariness of that war, in a way, broke the backs of very powerful countries.
Yes.
And that the West never fully recovered from that. And I think there's actually a strong case to be made there, which hasn't fully been made. Fussell didn't try to make it. He was actually just he was looking at the literature before and after World War I to show, look at the difference. Now, I think Buchanan wrongly set his sights on World War II, which was, of course, an unnecessary war in the sense that it shouldn't have been started
by Hitler.
By Hitler, exactly. It was not an unnecessary war once Hitler started it.
Yeah.
So I think Buchanan went on the wrong track there, and he did it, I think, partly because he was very much of an amateur historian, which is to say, he did not have a deep knowledge of history. He also,
but hang on, that's a weird one, because I don't have a deep knowledge. I'm no historian. I'm not even an amateur historian. But you don't need to be an amateur historian to see how ludicrous the terms are.
That
if you
is
look
true.
at what Hitler wanted, what Hitler himself was saying, his plans to invade Britain, his plans to invade to be world dominator. It doesn't take much excavation to find this stuff.
It doesn't. But what I mean is that if you get into it at the level of nuance, so let's just take, for example, the idea that Tucker Carlson has put out. I don't think Buchanan said this, but Tucker has basically said this. Maybe we should have, or it was Tucker's guest with Tucker nodding vigorously. Maybe
Daryl Cooper definitely said it.
Daryl Cooper said it. Tucker kind of thought this was a very provocative idea worth thinking about, or he didn't dispute it.
You're referring to the statement, Churchill is the chief villain of World War II.
No, I'm actually referring to the statement that maybe we should have allied with Hitler against Stalin.
Oh, has Daryl Cooper said that?
I know that statement was made because I've seen the clip with Tucker reacting to it.
I haven't seen that statement.
I wish I could remember. I think it is Cooper, but I'm not positive, so I'm not gonna go out on a limb on that.
I haven't seen that, but I have seen.
The statement has been made.
Daryl Cooper has certainly. Well, firstly, he's been found to being posting pro-Mein Kampf stuff. Mother Jones did an expose on him from a white nationalist website, and he did this tweet, which he then quickly deleted. It was a picture of Hitler in Paris versus the Olympic celebrations where they were mocking the Last Supper with Christ. This was last year, and he said, this one is infinitely preferable to this one, referring to Hitler. So he's definitely done stuff that is pro-Hitler.
So the point is that there was, at least briefly, a debate, if you want to call it that. There were people like Patton, after Hitler was defeated, who considered the possibility of sort of taking the war to Stalin. In other words, we're over here in Europe, we got the troops over here, and we're facing, Stalin's not a good guy, and this is a threat we're likely to face in the future. Why don't we deal with it now?
And Churchill as well.
Churchill too thought about this, exactly. But this is completely different from the view that at the beginning of the war, let's just say in 1939, that somehow Stalin posed a greater global threat than Hitler. Not true. That is not true. But these two positions can be muddled, the one with the other. And a discussion and debate that occurred after the war can be somehow used, or at least tapped into, particularly for younger people who don't really know these nuances at all. They go, so let's say someone says on Tucker's show, well, guess what? This topic was even discussed in Europe at the time. No, it wasn't. It was discussed in a different context, referring to a different situation after the Nazis had already been vanquished. But so what I'm getting at is, I think what's going on here is an effort ultimately to rewrite post-war history. And because World War II has the reputation of being, as I think it was, the good war, a war with clear objectives that were achieved, and this was a big win, a righteous war, the righteousness has to be dismantled. And that's why you have this project. It's not really ultimately even a project driven by curiosity about history. It is rather, how do we deploy some historical cudgels to beat up the post-war consensus, which is the real target.
And that's what you think Pat Buchanan's motives were?
I think for Pat Buchanan, he was seized with this apocalyptic dread that the West was coming down. By the way, he was not the inventor of this genre, right? If you flash back 30 years before Pat Buchanan, James Burnham wrote the book called The Suicide of the West. And Burnham, too, had the same apocalyptic, it's all coming down. And Burnham was brilliant. I mean, Burnham basically argued this. He said, look, let me look at a map of the world. He goes, in the year 1900, 85% of the real estate on the planet was under the supervision of the West, or to put it bluntly, of the white man. The white man controls the globe. He goes, now I'm going to give you a map circa, let's say, 1950. And you'll notice that largely because of decolonization, the white man's property has shrunk from 85% to 40% or 35%. He goes, what do you call this if not decline? And he goes, if this continues, he goes, the West will be no more. And then he goes on to, now, Burnham was discredited because of the fall of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union, and the fact that that was so unexpected, it was so spectacular, it was so one-sided, it produced the U.S. as a solitary world superpower. All of that, I think, dissolved that kind of Spenglerian gloom. But Buchanan was reviving it in the 1990s, but he was too early because there was still the upbeat mood of the peace dividend, and you had a rollicking stock market in the 1990s. So Buchanan seemed out of step to many of us who were watching him, and we liked Buchanan, but we were like, why is he going in this direction? He's marching to a different drummer now, is what we thought.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.